Thank you, Russ, and thank you, Joint Venture Silicon Valley. I'm delighted to partner again, this time on a topic fundamental to CHM's mission to decode technology for everyone to shape a better future for humanity. Everyone for the human condition. For technology to serve everyone for the benefit of humanity, diversity, inclusion, equity, and access are core to both the museum's values and our target impact. I'm so grateful that two exceptional thought leaders and doers in this field are accepting the invitation today to have a conversation about this topic. Let me introduce them to you right now. First, Shellye Archambeau, an experienced executive, Fortune 500 board member, advisor, and author. She's over 30 years of experience as a technology CEO and a board director with a track record of building brands and high-performance teams. She's a former CEO of MetricStream, a Silicon Valley-based governance, risk, and compliance software company where she shepherded the fledgling startup into a global market leader. She currently serves on the boards of Verizon, Nordstrom's, Roper Technologies, and Okta. She's also a strategic advisor to Forbes Ignite, the president of Arizona State University, and serves on the board of two national nonprofits, Catalyst and Braven. Freada Kapor Klein, Freada Kapor Klein, tongue-tied, is an entrepreneur and an activist in the field of organizational culture and diversity. She's the co-chair of the Kapor Center, which aims to make technology, ecosystems, and entrepreneurship more diverse and inclusive. She's also a founding partner at Kapor Capital, where she invests in seed-stage tech startups designed to create positive social impact by closing gaps of access, opportunity, or outcome for low-income communities and communities of color. With the Kapor Center team, Freada has co-authored studies about who leaves tech and why, as well as about biases experienced by Black, Latinx, Asian, and white female entrepreneurs. She's the founder of SMASH, now in its 18th year, which provides STEM education and access to social capital for low-income high school students of color on 10 university campuses across the country. Freada is a member of the Obama Foundation Tech Policy Council and the UC Board of Visitors. She serves on the advisor boards of Twilio and Permanent Impact Capital, and she's the founding advisor at Project Include, a community of women in Silicon Valley working to provide diversity and inclusion recommendations for tech companies. We're going to start the conversation today with Freada kicking things off with a brief presentation, and then I'll invite Shellye back to the program. Freada?
Thank you for the invitation and that warm introduction. I want to leap right in. Dan'l and Russell asked me to be provocative, so let's get started. I think we have to conclude that tech has failed in its efforts on diversity. If we look at the last few years, 2014 is when the latest crop of companies began releasing their numbers. Some of them had actually sued to try to keep them private. So we see some progress for women employees in tech, but that we see almost no movement at many of the larger companies when we're talking about Black or Latinx employees. Twitter did a little bit better, but we're also talking about still great underrepresentation when we think about the overall US population. So I think we have several trends in 2021 that are new and scary to employers, but I think we need to tackle them head on. One of those, we're seeing a lot of employee activism, trying to hold companies accountable to fair treatment, to diversity, inclusion, and access. We're also seeing new calls globally for stakeholder capitalism, not shareholder capitalism, but stakeholder capitalism, considering our customers, considering our employees, considering our communities, considering our impact on the world. Employees, especially younger employees coming straight out of school with mounds of debt, are looking for purpose. They are looking for new meaning in their employment, and we are seeing that they're making choices about where to go and where to stay based on helpful managers and companies that have a positive purpose in the world. We've also seen accountability statements since the murder of George Floyd last summer, and now we're seeing organizations pop up to see whether or not companies are actually living up to the pledges they made last summer. We're also looking at whether or not companies have safe and effective complaint systems. If they don't, you're going to find that Medium and Twitter and other social media become the complaint channels of choice. We also see tech's role in the expansion of income inequality, and what's happened during COVID just makes that stark reality more unbearable to those at the bottom. For many years, we've heard a debate within tech companies. Why has tech had such a hard time achieving its stated goals? Because after all, when tech wants to accomplish something, tech usually exceeds expectations rather than fails. So we have this endless back and forth. Is it a pipeline problem? Is it a tech culture problem? With lots of people weighing in on both sides. I think that's the wrong framing, and research supports the idea that this is the wrong framing, that there actually is a set of biases and barriers that underlie both the pipeline problem and the tech culture problem. The pipeline problem part that is real, although much of it isn't, is access to computer science education. The number of Black and brown kids who do not have internet access, who do not have access to computer science in public schools is appalling. And that does create a real pipeline problem. But then we have a tech culture problem where tech is only looking in a few rarefied places for its talent. And those are places where Black and brown engineers are less likely to be spotted. In 2017, the Kapor Center did a tech leavers study. Dan'l mentioned this, about who leaves tech and why. 4 major findings. First of all, the single largest reason for unwanted turnover from tech companies' perspective is unfairness, as experienced by the employees. Unfairness drives turnover, much more than those aggressive recruiters and headhunters reaching out to your teams. The experiences differ dramatically between groups. So our one-size-fits-all diversity and inclusion solutions have not been working, and that's why. We are currently seeing something north of $16 billion per year, solely attributable to the cost of replacing talent that walks out the door feeling that they were treated unfairly. And yet, on the positive side, there are some specific D&I initiatives that in fact can improve culture and reduce this unwanted turnover. We see that different groups, as I mentioned, leave for different reasons. So for instance, Black and Latinx men, engineers in particular in tech, leave because of an endless series of subtle biases, sometimes called microaggression, and a lot of stereotyping. Women of color, Black and Latinx women, especially engineers, the single greatest reason they leave is being passed over for promotion, often training their new boss. The LGBTQ plus population, their single greatest reason for leaving is bullying and public humiliation, whereas Caucasian men and women cite dissatisfaction with company leadership and their managers in particular as their reasons for heading to the door. There are hopeful trends and things to leverage, but very importantly, this is a marathon and not a sprint. I see a lot of hope in apprenticeship programs. Dan'l mentioned that I am on the Twilio.org advisory board. Twilio pioneered Hatch, their own apprenticeship program, hiring out of boot camps, giving paid jobs and additional classroom training, and then placing engineers onto teams. About 90% of those through Twilio's Hatch program have actually, at the end of 6 months, been offered full-time engineering roles. There are apprenticeship programs and training academies like GeekWise Academy run by Bitwise Industries, and they focus specifically on building tech ecosystems in underdog cities and have a great track record of training successfully thousands of people to build websites, to do coding as engineers, the entire stack of talent that tech needs. Dan'l mentioned I started SMASH, Summer Math and Science Honors Academy. We are on 10 college campuses, although we did have to pivot like many and go virtual. We have off-the-charts outcomes, taking low-income, first-generation, underrepresented students of color and having them graduate top universities as STEM majors at 4 times the national average. We've been doing it for 18 years. We've kept our outcomes. Anybody who wants to help contribute to that kind of pipeline development, we'd love your participation. We have college internship programs as well. And then finally, through our work at Kapor Capital, we have managed to achieve top quartile returns, beating PitchBook, beating Cambridge Associates for that ranking, with 100% gap closing tech startups. These are companies disproportionately started by underrepresented entrepreneurs, about 60% in fact, and we are sector agnostic, so that we have taken entrepreneurs with lived experience and turned that into real problem-solving, successful, fast-growing tech companies. So I look forward to the discussion with Shellye and Dan'l, and thank you again for inviting me.
That's a terrific introduction, Freada. Thank you very much for grounding the conversation. This is a very complicated and uncomfortable topic for most people. How do you create an inclusive mindset, and what are the kinds of tools and frameworks that individuals need to have to carry on in this domain? It's complicated. How do you move from this comfortable zone to a more dangerous place where learning really happens? And with that in mind, I'm going to introduce Shellye, and her background and contributions in this field are exceptional. She, as I mentioned, has been a contributor to Forbes, and she's the protagonist in Harvard Business School case study about becoming a CEO. In her new book called Unapologetically Ambitious, there's a lot of syllables in there for me, and I'm missing a few vowels in my first name, so I always get stuck. Unapologetically ambitious, take risks, break barriers, and create success on your own terms. This book is exceptional. It's designed to inspire readers with tools about how to fight and make trade-offs and to create the life you want. So Shellye, I'm going to draw you in right up front and say, what can leaders do to walk the talk? And what does it mean to build, and how important is it to build a diverse organization?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me, and Freada, great job in terms of setting the stage. So it really comes down to being intentional. I mean, imagine if instead of talking about the diverse numbers, meaning Black employees, female employees, Latinx employees, right? If we weren't talking about them, and instead everything that Freada shared, we were talking about customers. Imagine you were having a hard time getting new customers, or when you got new customers, just as many were leaving as you were signing on. Would you sit there and just wring your hands and say, this is too hard, I can't do this, I don't know what to do? No, you would not. Okay?
No, you wouldn't.
So we need to do the same thing. What do you do when you have trouble finding customers? Like, okay, well, let me talk to them, understand why are they leaving? Right? What value are they not receiving from me that they're getting from somebody else? Right? So first thing you have to do is to be intentional and say you actually want to solve the problem.
Right.
Because I'll be candid, I'm not quite sure that everybody actually wants to solve the problem, want to talk about it. but not necessarily want to solve the problem. And then we need to solve it the same way, with intention. And so how do you solve it? You say, great. First thing you do is you set objectives. Okay, this year we're going to grow our customer base by 20%, right? Whatever happens to be, fine. And then what do? Then you put in place a strategy to actually do that. And then you figure out who are the right people to execute on the strategy. And you put accountability, right? And then what do? You measure. How are we doing? Is it working? And then when it's not working, you go back and read. I mean, Dan'l, this is Silicon Valley 101. That's why it is not that hard, okay? So once we've got kind of that strategy, right, kind of piece putting together, and you talk about, well, Shellye, what does it take? Well, that's what it takes. It takes leadership being intentional and deciding that this is actually important, which means building it into the strategy. Not something that's kind of off to the side when we have time, when we're not busy, then we have time that, okay, we'll spend some time on the side projects. No, it needs to be woven right through the center, which means simple things. We all have expectations for managers, right? Meaning a manager comes in, we have expectations. We expect that a manager should be able to hire employees, to retain employees, to develop employees. They should be able to mentor and sponsor and train right employees. And they should create employees that are promotable, right? So that you can grow and scale your organization. A number of things we expect from managers before they themselves can be promoted. Well, why don't we just add an adjective? Why don't we say we expect managers to be able to identify diverse talent, hire diverse talent, develop diverse talent, retain diverse talent, mentor, sponsor, promote diverse talent? It's the same thing. We just want people to look at it with a broader lens. And if we set that as the expectation all the way through the company, and we actually measure against it, and we actually follow through on the commitments to say, all right, if you want to get promoted up to a certain level, you've got to demonstrate that you can do this. Guess what? People are going to do it. People usually do what they're asked to do when it actually counts. So we have to build it into the strategy.
All right. So Shellye, it sounds to me like you started your business career in sales because you know what you wanted to go get and how to set a strategy to make that happen. But oftentimes, before we get to Freada's comment about why people leave, don't you often hear that we just can't find the diverse talent? It's just not out there. Everyone's competing for the same talent, so therefore,
you know what? The whole concept of we have a talent shortage, I just don't agree. We do not have a raw talent shortage. It's one of those things where it's almost like your kids, right? Your kids come in and say, Dad, I can't find my fill in the blank, my mitt, my baseball glove, my whatever. And what do you say? Well, did you look? Yes, I looked, and I don't see it. Well, guess what? You always find it for them, right? But you actually have to look. Talent exists everywhere. But if we expect it just to show up on our doorstep and we just do this and it's all there in all of its different capabilities, it's not, right? We need to do a better job, actually, of making sure that we are engaged in the networks, the different talent pools. It's just like fishing. I keep dropping my hook in the same pond. I'm going to catch the same fish. And I keep saying, I don't get different fish. Well, guess what? You're in the same pond. Go fish in some other bodies of water and you will catch different things. It's just like the ocean, right? So this whole notion about, a shortage and it's not there. I like to quote Bill Campbell, who was a longtime mentor of mine, right? And Bill used to say, you could always find a woman or a person of color to do a job. It may just take you a little longer, but you can always find it. So we just need to take the time to go look, because trust me, it's there. The majority of this planet, the majority of this country, right? White males make up less than 40% of this country. I used to know the exact numbers, which means the majority are actually quote unquote diverse.
Right.
And if you're telling me that with over 60% of the population of this country, right, diverse, that there isn't any talent there, it's only in that 30+%, it's just not right. It's just not right.
Yeah. Well, Freada, you referenced rationale and reasons, if you will, why individuals with diverse backgrounds, self-identified, leave positions in Silicon Valley. Isn't this the land of the meritocracy, where just the best rise to the top. Is that the way we should be thinking about things? Or is there more, as Shellye says, of an intentional need to pay attention?
There's definitely more of a need of intentionality, as Shellye described. This is not the land of meritocracy. Silicon Valley has told itself that story for a very long time. Decades ago, I was told that Silicon Valley is the most meritocratic place on the planet. The best ideas get heard. Look at any of the data about who gets hired, about whose business plans get funded, and you realize this is, as my husband, Mitch Kapor, was quoted as saying more than a decade ago, this is a mirrorocracy, not a meritocracy. And I do want to talk about this issue that I think Shellye and I completely agree on, which is there can be a bit of a pipeline, but there is not a pipeline shortage, but there's no talent shortage. Mm-hmm. And I think what we confuse is skills with pedigrees. So as a chief people officer said to her troops recently, when an engineering manager says, go hire a Stanford CS graduate who worked at Google, those are pedigrees. Those are not skills. Mm-hmm. And so if we're not so lazy and we actually write down the skills we need, then we find, as Shellye points out, there is an enormous talent pool.
Exactly. If I could just add to that, Dan'l.
Feel free.
Sure. So HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, graduate over 60% of African American and STEM grads, all right, in this country. But if you talk to most companies, are they fishing in that pond? Maybe at 1 or 2 schools, maybe at 3 or 4 schools. There are 100 HBCUs, right? So it exists. The overall talent, the skills, et cetera, exist. But people have to be willing to move outside of their individual networks, right, to be able to get there. You know, it's interesting. LinkedIn, a couple of years back, actually did this, study and research and showed that about 70% of people's careers, jobs that they find in their careers, roles they find in their careers, actually are either found through or helped by their network. Mm-hmm. Guess what? In this country, our networks are pretty segregated.
Right.
So if you're not part of the right networks, you don't have access. You just don't have access. So we've got to figure out how we encourage people to move beyond their existing networks to find the talent that exists.
Yeah, go right ahead, Freada. Go ahead.
But I think that's where Shellye's point about accountability of managers comes in. When C-suite folks miss their targets, their sales targets, their revenue targets, we see heads roll. Year after year, companies miss their diversity targets and nothing happens. No one is held accountable for it. The CEO isn't, the board isn't, and I think that accountability is going to be part of what we need going forward. Shellye also identified the need for the accountability of managers. I often get asked about, we couldn't find anybody with the right experience. And I say, okay, if you move identifying, hiring, developing, promoting diverse talent as an absolute requirement for your managerial job, not a nice to have, a need to have. If it's part of your goals to be a diverse and welcoming company, then it needs to show up in every job description. So move that competency from nice to have to need to have, and you will find yourself hiring different kinds of managers who know how to identify and promote diverse talent.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit, we were having a conversation earlier that I'd like you two to talk about relative to doors being opened. Shellye mentioned Bill Campbell, someone that I actually knew quite well, met him on his first day in Silicon Valley. I was at Apple when he started there, and he's someone who opened the doors for so many people. And it does take that type of leadership and mindset. So let's talk a little bit about opening doors, because that is, part of the situation and problem. there are also the issues which we should talk a little bit about, again, about why people leave, which gets into perhaps this, relatability and some context within work, because people, they often join companies and leave managers, right? So let's talk about opening doors and then the process of keeping people in the system.
Sure. I'll be happy to start on this one, Dan'l, because I'll hear often from women, from people of color, right, from people from the LGBTQ community, et cetera, that sometimes they feel they're made to feel badly about the door being open for them, right? And trust me, I've heard it. Heck, oh, you're on the board of Verizon? Oh, it's great. They're focused on diversity. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways to take that, right? But the point is, it doesn't matter why the door got opened. The door's been open for people for all kinds of reasons. And Dan'l, you just gave the example of Bill Campbell opening the door for you. People get the door open because their neighbor knows somebody who works at a company, and so they're help you get an interview. Somebody's, uncle graduated from this university, so you now get, a chance to meet a professor and therefore get an in. There are all kinds of reasons. So-and-so played golf, and there's all kinds of reasons why doors open that give people a chance to prove themselves. So it doesn't matter why the door got opened. Don't ever let anybody make you feel badly for why a door got open, because the only thing that counts is what you do when you get on the other side. At the same time, we should all be opening the door for people, because that's that whole network issue I talked about. If we just stay within our network and we only let people, right, that we know and that we touch and whatever in through the door, then we're going to have all kinds of challenges in terms of ensuring that we've got a broad set of people represented within our organizations. So we all need to figure out how we open doors, and nobody should feel badly about why a door gets opened.
No, I think that's right. Freada, your comments about that, and obviously how doors get closed when people leave too, because the reputation follows, right?
Well, that's right. Taking your latter point first, there is huge reputational risk to companies if they don't create welcoming environments, because that turnover leads to people telling their friends, to people telling those they went to school with, to Shellye's point about networks. The last thing you want is the star engineer from an HBCU leaving because he or she was treated badly and telling all other alumni of that university not to go to that particular company. And indeed, that is what happens. Just, a few minutes on Twitter will confirm how quickly those stories spread, which was also to my point about if you don't take the time to create safe and accessible complaint and communication channels, then indeed people are going to tell their stories on Twitter and on other social media. But the ways that tech companies are losing money, they're losing people who have insights based on their lived experience that could be extraordinarily valuable in product design, in opening new markets, in reaching new customers. And Kapor Capital's financial success is entirely attributable to that insight. We hire people whose lived experience gave them the passion to start a tech business. They have the insights, they have the network, they have the grit, they have the vision, and that has what has led to us having outsized returns and a majority diverse set of entrepreneurs.
There's an interesting problem space as a result of the pandemic today, where there needs to be a long-term framework for retooling large parts of the social fabric and the sort of economic infrastructure. And I'm curious about each of your perspectives, given your involvement in nonprofits, about the public-private partnerships, but also the nonprofit sector being supportive. And you've done a really nice job, Freada, at Kapor with Capital and the center and your programs. And then Shellye, you as well, from your volunteer work and other things that you've done along the way. And really small companies in Silicon Valley, super startups, typically don't have that luxury. The larger organizations have a little more of that. So I'd just like you to both comment a little bit about small companies versus large companies and this problem space. And Shellye, you've done it at both, right? And Freada, you've been involved in helping little companies blossom into giant companies. So just, because the audience is diverse here in terms of those that work at big companies and those that are in startups, and many in the audience come from the public sector or the nonprofit sector. So just a little bit of conversation about that might be a good way to end up our call today.
Go ahead, Freada, you can start.
Okay. Well, so first of all, I think that our sectors are blurring a bit and that's a good thing. I think each sector has something to contribute to problem solving, and that's what we should be focusing on. In terms of little companies, I'm reminded of what Jeff Lawson said, who's the CEO of Twilio, when we would invite him to Smash events and other things, and he would say, that's great, but my company's not profitable. I've got to build this company. And then he stopped and thought to himself, well, when is it going to be a good time to start thinking about diversity? When I have 1,000 white male engineers, is that the best time to think about diversity? At that point, Jeff had that light bulb moment and made diversity at Twilio a complete priority. But I think a lot of tech's failure is putting off dealing with diversity. So you end up with a denominator problem. If you've got 100,000 employees, it's pretty easy to do the math. You have to hire an awful lot of people to move the needle 1 percentage point. And so to think about how many thousands of employees you have to hire if you didn't bake in diversity at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And there are, as you mentioned, there are nonprofits all along the way that can help you. And I mentioned Smash has a program, Smash Rising. It is our scholars who are now in college, and its internship program. Kapor Capital, we help our startups in our portfolio find interns and train those interns. We bring all the interns across the portfolio together so that they have a peer group. Size is never an excuse for not starting on diversity.
Starting a company, you need everything. You need financial people and marketing people. You need engineers. You need lawyers. You need everything, which means you can look broadly, right, to fill in those different roles. As you get bigger, I now need a head of international who speaks Spanish, who does, it all of a sudden becomes super, super narrow of what you actually need. And now you say, oh, now I'd like to look for a diverse person. And then you'll say, okay, the spec that I have with 10 little line items out of what I'm looking for, I can't find anybody that's diverse. I'm trying to hire diverse people. Like, no, you wait until you had one role and then you started looking. By the way, this is true for boards as well, right? We fill up our board, then we say, oh, we have a board seat enough, let's make it diverse. And all of a sudden you're trying to tick 5 different boxes. No, it's so much easier to start with diversity at the beginning because you need everything.
Right. That makes lots of sense. Any other comments on that front, Freada? I have one little thing that I've learned along the way I want to share as well, but Freada, you have any follow-up?
Well, I think Shellye and I are saying the same thing, that it is so much easier to bake it in from the beginning. And employees are voting with their feet. Employees are seeking out companies that care about diversity. And we've seen this in recent controversies where employees are leaving, employees are accepting severance packages rather than be quiet about their views on social issues.
Exactly. If I could just add one element to the care point, because I really like the word care. I will tell you, most people want to feel cared about. This is true personally, and it's true in the workplace. So, the point that I'll just add to what Freada said is they want to know that the company cares about them. And so when they don't see different behaviors that would suggest that they are cared about, right, that's when they leave. So yes, diversity, when you have diversity focus and initiatives for inclusion, et cetera, does that help with the caring? The answer, it does. But I'm just telling you, it comes down to real personal, which is, do you even care that I'm here, right? Do you actually care if I'm successful? That's what employees want to know, which means just like customers. So you have to actually get to know and understand what their needs are, right? And how to help make them successful.
Yeah, I agree. And if you listen, oftentimes the customer will tell you what you need to
Absolutely.
know. And so, you know, one of the things that I learned over time, and this is a journey that will never end, so it'll be continuous learning, but you talk about diversity, effectively inviting someone to the dance. It's like, all right, there's lots of people you could invite. Then there's this notion of inclusion, which is, are you going to ask them to dance? Well, maybe you will, maybe you won't. And then there's asking them how they like to dance, right? Is it a slow dance? Is it a fast dance? Or are you really even going to let them pick the music, right? So there's a level of invitation and engagement that is fundamental, and that's, I think, what you're both saying. You know, understand, be intentional, recognize that we all have filters, that bias is in the water. There's no unbiased opinions out there. We all have them because of our context. But I can't thank you both enough. I'll ask you each if you have any parting comments, because I know our program's about to wrap right now. So, Freada, you opened up, so let me ask you to go now, and then I'll ask Shellye to close. Any last comments?
Well, again, thank you for the opportunity for this dialogue. Always a pleasure to speak with both of you. I want to reiterate, I want to end on a hopeful note. There are so many avenues to building a diverse company. And you got to just roll up your sleeves and take a risk and ask for help. Because we've been saying listening is a really important part of the journey.
That's right. Shellye?
Actually, Freada took the words right out of my mouth. The answer is, if this is hard for you, that's okay. That's why you get help. There are a lot of resources out there, so go tap some resources. This is not something you have to do by yourself.
Yeah, like they say, learning happens in that danger zone. So you've got to go there or you're not going to learn, and you have to be intentional. So you both started with that, and let's close with that. So thank you both. Thank Joint Venture. Thank Russ. And Russ, back to you.